Hello from Anastasiou. Welcome to What's Next. We are talking to Phakamo Tech on What's Next this week, and it's a great pleasure to welcome two of the leadership from the organization who are going to be joining us. First up, it's Lucas Ledwaba, who is the CEO of Phakamo Holdings. Also joining us is Kabelo Sekele, who is the Director for Strategic New Business Development and Partnerships at Phakamo Holdings. So warm welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me on What's Next. I mean, you've recently won a very prestigious award from Microsoft, their top emerging partner for 2020. I mean, that's phenomenal when you look at 2020, and I don't have to remind you what a year it's been for most businesses. That's a phenomenal achievement, and a big congratulations to your teams, gents. Let me start off with you, Lucas. Phakamo Tech. Tell us about Phakamo Tech and Phakamo Holdings, the holding company. Tell us a bit about yourselves.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be engaging with you. Really, from our side, we are a 10-year-old cybersecurity and risk company. And what we really push about is set by our tagline: we enable and secure Africa's digital transformation. Simple objective. We just make sure that organizations build their confidence when it comes to technology adoption, securing that landscape and making sure that they can sleep while the technology and the business do what it has to.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. And I mean, certainly this year is going to be one of those years that I'm sure you both are going to remember from these kind of security things. So let me start off with you, Kabelo. I mean, what are your thoughts on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the fourth industrial revolution that we talk about, and, you know, quite broadly, but in particular, the expansion of cybersecurity threats? It must have been a big issue for you this year.
Absolutely. And thanks again, Aki, for providing us the platform to have this discussion with you. So yes, so I think what the pandemic has done is that it's obviously accelerated the adoption of fourth industrial revolution oriented technologies and solutions for a lot of companies and governments. So as you would imagine, you know, effectively what the pandemic has subsequently also done is that it's now forced entities that otherwise would have taken 2 to 3 years to kind of work through their digital transformation journey to kind of squeeze that into 3 to 4 months. And as you can imagine, kind of squeezing that type of amount of work into such a short period of time does leave gaps for certain things to be overlooked, governance, risk, kind of all these other elements that otherwise would be taken into account if the runway was a bit longer. But the pandemic has certainly shortened that. What we've seen from a cybersecurity standpoint is that, you know, precisely because of that reason, a lot of companies were really rushed to obviously enable their workforce to be able to work remotely from home. And what that subsequently does is that it expands the threat surface area in relation for opportunities for cybersecurity threats to really come in there. And as you would know, there's been a massive 10, 15-fold activity around phishing emails associated with COVID. So a lot of people have become susceptible to some of those techniques used by cyber threat actors who have used this opportunity really with everybody working from home outside of the corporate environment, and now we're working on perimeters that are not secure, working from home, unmanaged Wi-Fi's, etc. So it really has expanded the threat surface area.
That is fascinating, and I'm sure. It's the big focus for most organizations. You talk about the Achilles heel during the lockdown and remote working. I think this is one of them. Lucas, I mean, when you look at the landscape as it is and the companies that have had to rapidly adapt, what are those critical considerations that companies must take as a response to mitigating these cyber risks that Kabelo was talking about?
The funny thing is that we're talking about technology, and we tend to forget that there's people that really leverage that technology, that use the technology. And one of the key considerations to touch on is the people aspect. How do you get your employees to appreciate the threat that is associated with them utilizing these specific technologies, working from home, sharing passwords, making sure our systems get scanned. I mean, from our side, working with Microsoft, we've been able to numerous customers, both big and small, with technologies that would then not only address the people side of things, but strengthen the processes, how business ensure that when you put in a security control, it doesn't impede productivity. So, for example, you, Aki, when you're working from home, we need to ensure that your machine is always secure. We need to make sure when you get an email, that email has gone through the right controls to sift through any threats and not expose you. If you are exposed, you must then get a notification that becomes an awareness exercise. Things such as multi-factor authentication. Most of us, we've gone in those days, we just use a single password. Now we get OTPs. How do we then embed these OTPs within our working environment? As I log into my emails, can I put an OTP to secure that? So the people, the processes, and when you take technology, it must marry nicely to then just bring that confidence across the landscape, because with this whole COVID thing, as Kabelo did indicate, you have a 3-year plan squeezed into 3 months, at times 2 months, and that at the same time, the risk increments. And without business having visibility around how to manage that, and the users knowing how to then really operate, because it's a new world, introducing these capabilities would then ensure that they remain informed, engaged, whilst the processes get automated, there's visibility, and business can really continue without impeding productivity.
But do organizations have the necessary information, visibility, capacity and capability to oversee cyber risks, Lucas?
The answer would be a no. And reason being is that, as I started with the people, process, and technology, business tend to focus on investing purely on technology without the ability to then specify what is their risk posture in terms of the business. As I adopt technology, what does this technology mean to my business? And then how do I expose my users from that perspective? So just because I've placed a firewall in the environment doesn't necessarily bring me visibility. Therefore, you need to have a simplified manner where you marry machine learning, artificial intelligence with your own internal expertise to then provide the necessary information that then drive business. From a Pacama perspective, what we have done in recent time is that we have enabled our own security operations center, which allows us, we call it a 4th generation security center, which allows us to monitor clients' environments wherever they are. And instead of talking about a hack in the context of hacking of a server, we're talking about a hack in the context of a risk posture of the business. Is it just about the money that you pay, or is it about protecting the information that matters, or the process that matters in generating value for business? So that when you now look at investments, it's investments that bring value. It's not an expenditure responding to just a threat, but an expenditure towards investing in securing your business. Hence, we said we enable and secure digital transformation.
It's fascinating listening to you, because these are the challenges that most organizations face. So what do organizations do? What do they need to do in responding to this lack of cybersecurity and risk governance, for example, Lucas?
That's where, strategic partnerships comes into play. Your customers need to understand that a security service provider should be one that understands and appreciates your business. Firstly, because out of that, you get then to have a partner that will then help you translate this new world called digitization in terms of how you process, how do you adopt technology, to then understand that if I'm going to introduce an automated means of operations, right? How do I secure it? And if I were to be exposed, how do I then drive it? So from a Phakamo perspective, what we then do is that we go through understanding not just your IT strategy, but your business strategy, your business processes. And then when we embed security, it's security that really now supports what you want to achieve. And that's why we push in the statement of, it's really about a zero trust architecture. When you come in, as I log in, multi-factors we touched earlier on, I must be identifiable, I must be qualified to access information, thereby I know what is it that I need to access. So it's basically having the right access at the right time for the right purpose. And those are normally done by having a relationship or a partnership that is focused around value. Yeah, so when you look at the partnership itself, right? The partnership is one that would drive value because the partner understands your business. So security now becomes a key business enabler rather than a technical conversation.
Okay, no, that's interesting. But I mean, Kabelo, you're listening there, and I see you in nodding as well. But when you look at cybersecurity and the scale of cybersecurity, and you look at some of the breaches that have happened, and you look at some of the, some of the dangerous things that we've seen, and not forgetting that we've got Papia just around the corner. When you talk about compliance, is cybersecurity and compliance just for large corporates?
So, Aki, no, absolutely not. And I think you've obviously mentioned some of the larger breaches that have taken place in the last 4, 6, 10 months. And if we reflect on one such breach, if you look at what happened to one of the large banks, one of the vulnerabilities was a third-party vendor that was a very small business that actually hadn't taken the necessary steps to put in the requisite security controls to be able to safeguard that particular interaction with the large bank. And that's how a hacker then used that particular vulnerability based in a small business to be able to access a larger target, if I can put it that way, and use the vulnerabilities that were in that small business to be able to impact a larger business. So that obviously demonstrated the necessity for both small and large businesses to take into consideration that cybersecurity is pertinent to all levels of business. That's because, in an interconnected world, in a global village, small businesses interact with large businesses every single day. And the reality is that everybody needs to take the requisite steps to make sure that the efficient governance, risk, and compliance elements associated with cybersecurity are built into a lot of these interactions. Now, what can be stated is that, it might be a bit more challenging for smaller oriented businesses, given, budget constraints, resource, human capital constraints, etc. But again, that kind of goes back to the partnership story around, having partners that understand you as a business, if you're an SMME, understanding the budgetary constraints, and then putting forward solutions that are applicable to the size, nature, and budget that's associated with the business. So I think partnerships become central in terms of building out cybersecurity capabilities and resiliency for both large and small organizations.
All right. Well, I mean, Kabelo, you make perfect sense there. But how costly is cybersecurity and compliance to companies of all sizes? I mean, can the small guys afford it? And you say you can tailor make it, but how much does it cost to get to that point?
Cost is relative. So I guess, if you look at what it means to be exposed and breached as a business from a reputational standpoint, and you kind of quantify that, it really is never really equivalent to the amount of investment you would need to make in order to prevent that outcome. So from a cost perspective, there are different solutions. And again, all businesses are not all the same, all require different interventions, different solutioning, and at different price points. Now, what becomes very important, I think Lucas had mentioned it earlier in our conversation, is really to understand what the business and corporate strategy looks like and how that lines in with the IT overall strategy, because those two elements will help determine the nature, velocity, and scale of investment required from a cybersecurity perspective. So do you need to protect everything? No. Do you need to protect the crown jewels? Absolutely, yes. Now, those crown jewels are different for different entities. So I think that's where strategy really plays a big part. So I do know that we have a lot of customers that say, geez, compliance is so costly, so is cybersecurity. Not everything is required to be protected at the same level, right? Given the different risk parameters. So that's how you then really start to manage how you invest in cybersecurity, for it to be a bit more concise and direct in relation to what the actual overall corporate strategy requires.
And I guess as well, I mean, you touched on the reputational damage, and that if you go into those kind of numbers, you might actually lose your business because of a breach if you don't do things properly. So I think it's important to raise that reputational damage. Lucas, how can companies affect a business enabling cybersecurity, for example? And when you talk about the strategy and addressing these kind of risks, Lucas?
So I'll just actually feed from what Kabelo just shared just now regarding, understanding the business. So the cyber strategy really, from a business perspective, differs mainly purely because each organization has different objectives. Now, from our side, what we then drive is collaborate with the business itself, with the customer themselves, to then identify the critical crown jewels, so to say. and understanding the critical personnel that would then participate in the delivery of that strategy. So most organizations tend to look at corporate strategy or IT strategy, or what is now being called digital transformations, right? And then out of that, they would consider cybersecurity at the tail end. It's like what we do with our cars, right? We would buy cars and then think of our trackers a little bit later. But if you look at the new innovations, is that trackers are now embedded within cars because of the technology. Now, what we say is that within the business strategy, those risks must be understood, because when you go as a corporate and then, or as any form of business, you say you're going to leverage technology to then drive your objectives, you're really saying that you're also opening yourself to this large threat landscape. And without incorporating or considering cybersecurity, you are then saying, I'm going to come in, build this house, leave the windows open, leave the doors open, and then feel safe. And the reality is that when you come back, it will be nice and clean, and the couch that you like to rest on won't be there. And this is what we try and drive with customers, that from a simplistic understanding is that the cybersecurity strategy should be embedded within the business strategy, because now immediately you adopt technology, you are changing how you're doing things. Thereby the investments as well can be secondary, has to be understood in the same way you would invest in a machinery, for example.
It's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. You often hear that. Kabelo, in recent weeks, I mean, we've seen some major organizations experiencing breaches, for example. Do you think companies have the right data governance strategy and policies and controls in place to minimize these kind of risks?
So like it actually varies, Aki. So, again, so not all businesses are the same, and the level of maturity in relation to, governance, risk, and compliance and cybersecurity differ, right? So, and that's usually commensurate with the nature of investment that is made and how central it is. So certain industries, like for instance, those in the financial services space, have no choice but to ensure that the most appropriate level of investment is made in ensuring compliance and cybersecurity is at the center of what they do. Not all industries are required to do that, purely because from a regulatory perspective, that's not necessarily a prerequisite. But to answer your question more definitively, no. So, and I say no because firstly, it's not a snapshot, it's a marathon, right? So the idea is it never ends, right? Your state of compliance, your security posture is ever changing, ever evolving. Things like the pandemic tend to change that. Things like new introduction of new technology into the environment tend to change that. So it's an ever-moving picture. It's not a static picture. But in relation to the investment and whether or not the state of preparedness, at least in South Africa, and I can also speak globally, it's not really there. And it's not there really primarily because of awareness. I don't think it's the shortage of technology or features or capabilities. It's really around awareness and training and human capital development, right? Because at the end of the day, technology is only as powerful in the hands in which somebody knows how to affect that technology or apply it or execute on it. So for us, we found that a large portion of the shortcomings really comes around just the general state of awareness. And I think also the general state of awareness at leadership levels in a lot of organizations. So IT teams have full understanding about, the threats, the dangers of cybersecurity. But the relation is, for cybersecurity and governance and risk to be really impactful, it really needs to be driven from leadership in an organization, because that then permeates down to the rest of the organization, setting a culture. So it's more around setting a security, zero trust aware culture in an organization, and then have processes and technologies that then subsequently enable that or drive that. So it's really around, really more than anything else, around awareness building, training, building that capability with organizations.
And especially with Papia just around the corner, we all have to change. It's a complete mindset of thinking of how we handle data. So, Lucas, I mean, with all that has been shared, what kind of tools, for example, are available when you want to enable these companies of all sizes? What kind of tools are we looking at here?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit biased from where we stand, purely because of our expertise and just mainly experience that we've seen in enabling different sizes of companies. So, for example, leveraging Microsoft extensively, it's actually our strategic partner. So, if you look at where you can invest, you are a one-man legal show, right? Fact of the matter is that you have very sensitive IP. You need to secure it. You need to make sure that no one can infiltrate your emails. So things such as Office 365, they come with security embedded in them. They start to empower you. You might not necessarily be a technofundi, but by mere virtue of utilizing such platforms, you get some form of security in that regard. When you go to enterprise levels, I mean, you have capabilities such as Microsoft Azure Information Protection that helps you get ready. It sets the baseline for your peer conversation because you then have visibility around the type of data that transacts in your environment. So here, people might think that we are talking thousands, millions and millions and millions for a one-man show. You find that it's a mere 200 to a couple of $100 that enables you. And as Kabelo did indicate earlier on to say, it's also the question from a business perspective side to say, when you sit as a business owner, what really matters? Is it the end results where after a breach, you have to deal with legal, reputational, and financial risk that you have to address? Or is it better to start and then apply your business from the onset? I mean, we've engaged multiple customers, big and small. Initially, the small ones would become a little bit of a challenge and quite reluctant to really invest, purely because the clarity around the key importance of our business is not known and the respect of it. So the tools are there that empower customers, that are really affordable from the likes of Microsoft. And it's always a pleasure from our side to make sure that we share that information, and the platform that you've provided, we're hoping that will enable and provide visibility or insight as to say, how can any company really respond to such?
Okay, and how would a company then stay current on its cyber threat landscape, Lucas? Is that a challenge for most companies?
Where our biggest challenge was, we find organizations investing in technology, they leave it there. They expect technology to respond and make things happen. It's like a magic wand, whereas the reality is that it needs to be embedded within the business itself. Because, for example, on our side with our Security Operations Center, on a daily basis, guys are engaging with the likes of the Microsoft Intelligence Security Association to get the latest information, with other vendors across the world, and embed that information within the platform and then feedback to the business itself, from the IT or the security engineer to the CIO to the CISO, who then take it to the board through audit committees and other participating committees. So the only way organizations can really play part in terms of improving their security posture, adopting an intelligent platform, is to understand that it needs to be embedded within processes. But here's the thing, Aki. The reality is that in cybersecurity, there's a major skills shortage across the world. So it does become critical to then find partners that would then enable you. And it's a specialty-based domain here that requires people who know their stuff. We've seen a lot where, because I can come in, install an antivirus for you, and then can raise my hand and say I'm a cybersecurity engineer. We can't take that risk because your business can be basically insured by Lucas at a corner of his house. It has to be insured by capable organizations that would empower you. So that is really how we then drive that intelligence to customers.
In case of a breach, and how would an organization respond? How should an organization respond? And when and how does law enforcement come to play? Because it's happening every single day. We're seeing it around us. How do you react? What are you supposed to do?
That's a great question right there. We've experienced that in a couple of, I'd say the couple of 18 months in the country, both in the private and the public sector, where the basic responses have been just unplug, just reset, start from scratch.
Reboot. My favorite is reboot.
Exactly. And the reality is that after you reboot, what happens to that 5-year-old critical data that you've worked on, that 5-year-old IP that defines your business? So the biggest challenge has been organizations unprepared. The maturity around incident response really lack. And incident response, the same way we adopt business continuity, where we say if the building burns, we can move somewhere else, there's insurance that we can leverage. We do not consider within the sphere of cybersecurity. And this is where we come into play to say, let us help you architect a custom-made cyber incident response plan that would then involve our local enforcement. And again, fact of the matter is that even our local enforcement aren't really equipped. And this is where, with organizations such as ours, we need to then start creating this collaborative engagements where we can share intelligence, where we can share knowledge, so that, from an economic perspective, we provide that confidence that then ensures that we can leverage the digital transformation to even grow our country, not just businesses. And we take it one step at a time by understanding your business. Once we understand the business and we have the confidence with you, we then architect that incident response that then benefits your line of business. It's not a template from a site from somewhere. It's actually a custom-based, your business-informed plan that gets architected.
Kabelo, when you look at what we've been talking about, are there quick wins? I mean, is that possible? Is there such a thing that one can say that there are some quick wins for companies that they can take to ensure that they've got the right compliance, the right resiliency of their businesses? Are there quick wins?
Yes, Aki, they are. And I think for me, I'm a real advocate for, kind of empowering your people, because people drive businesses. Technology enables businesses, but people really drive businesses. So one of the quick wins, and maybe I can mention 3. So the first would be really to look at getting a cybersecurity awareness program in place that really serves to kind of educate your personnel to know what type of threats to look for when they do occur. So for instance, phishing is obviously a massive one. So the bulk of breaches across the world, about 85% of them have been as a result of a phishing attack, which obviously comes in the form of social engineering. An email comes into your mailbox, has certain attributes that are not necessarily clear to somebody who's not really paying attention, and you click a link and then compromises the entire network. That's really just an awareness thing, right? So when you get an email, what do you look for? What should you look for? What artifacts or elements in the email are a bit suspicious? How do you then subsequently report that particular suspicious activity in your organization? There must be an individual internally that's an internal champion for the business from a cybersecurity perspective. It doesn't have to be a technically oriented individual. It could just be somebody who's an advocate internally in the business, so somebody can have some way where they can share this information. So that'll be the first, right? So awareness, building kind of training awareness really around your people, right? Because the world now is all about the human hack, right? So hackers are really looking at the weakest vulnerability point in organizations, and in the main, it is Cindy, who's the admin clerk, who works at the basement of the operation that is being targeted, correct? It's not the firewall, it's not the perimeter security. All of those hackers know that tons of money is being spent on those particular solutions and technologies, but not much is being done to ensure that Cindy, the admin clerk, is sufficiently geared to deal with type of suspicious phishing, social engineering. So that'll be the one. The second would certainly be kind of having a look at your environment. So there's a set of things that you can do. So you can run a vulnerability assessment of your environment, where you can get a partner similar to ourselves that gives you a third-party objective view in understanding where the holes and gaps are in your present environment and what type of steps you can take in order to remedy those, right? So you can get a once-off assessment. It is suggested that you do a vulnerability assessment almost quarterly, But obviously, from a cost and budgetary perspective, that does become a challenge. But you certainly need to have one at least once a year, or at least twice a year, maybe at the beginning of the year to understand, to get a baseline, and then certainly at the end of the year to understand how you've measured up against that baseline. What gaps have you kind of plugged? Which ones have expanded in nature? Which others have contracted in nature? So a vulnerability assessment might be a good exercise. And then the third would obviously be a penetration test. So a penetration test is all about you putting up your organization to hackers, right? So we have, for instance, in our organization, certified ethical hackers, right? So certified ethical hackers are hackers that have tool sets to penetrate organizations, but they do so on an ethical basis. So the idea is not to cause damage, but rather to stress test the posture, cybersecurity posture of your business. That is really important because what that helps you do is to set a baseline. A lot of entities' biggest challenge is they don't know where they stack up in relation to where their current posture and capability is from a cybersecurity perspective. Everybody, like Lucas said, I've bought a firewall, I've bought a intrusion protection solution, I've bought an intrusion detection solution, and therefore I should be relatively okay. And the reality is no, because there's a whole lot more that needs to go around that: people, process, and then technology really then enables all of those other pieces. So I think those are kind of the three that I would say, if you could get on the line. There are some entities that are really doing awesome work around cyber awareness training. Obviously, there are a lot of entities that do vulnerability and lifecycle management kind of audits. And then also then penetration testing might be a good one.
Fascinating. I mean, you've given me lots of things to think about, and anybody that's watching this, really highlighting those critical things that, you know, organizations should be looking at, because the reality is it's not going to get easier. Hackers are going to get a lot more sophisticated. They're after our data, and, you know, we've got the POPIA Act coming very soon. So we have to get our houses in order, and businesses, whatever size they are, need to understand the severity of these kind of threats. Lucas Ledwaba, the CEO of Pacama Holdings, and thank you for joining me, and thank you to Kabelo Sekele, who's the Director for Strategic New Business Development and Partnerships at Pacama Holdings. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, and wish you lots of strength in the future. And yeah, you certainly have lots of things on your hands, and I'm sure that you know, these cyber threats are going to keep us all busy over the next few years, because that's the reality and the vulnerability in most businesses. Thank you for joining me on What's Next.
Thank you, Aki.